First of all, I'm grateful to the philosophy family for giving me an opportunity to discuss the philosophy of inclusiveness of Professor K. Chachandamurthy Garu. I'm happy to state that for this meeting, we have got wonderful scholars, and I have to especially mention Professor Rajani, who is a Vice Chancellor of Ambedkar University, Srikakulam, and she is a direct student of Professor Murthy, and she is here. We are very grateful to her. And also we have got great professors like Sambasiva Prasad, and then Professor Appan Ramanujam, Professor Ghosh, and many others, such as Badri and others. So let me tell you what we are going to do. Actually, you might have seen that this program is a joint program organized by Chennai Philosophical Forum, which is functioning from Madras. I'm the founder, secretary of that, and it has been functioning for 11 years, for the past 11 years. And few months ago, we organized an international webinar on the phenomenology of consciousness, and there are many international participants also. One from China, 3 or 4 from Thailand and other places. So it was a grand success. So for which I am grateful to the philosophy family. Now I and Professor Dash and Professor Rao and Maharana, we had worked out a plan. That is, it is high time for us to discuss our own philosophers. So I agreed to deliver 2 lectures on our own Indian tradition in the context of recent Indian philosophy. Because I always make a distinction between contemporary Indian philosophy and recent Indian philosophy, or recent Indian philosophers say. By recent Indian philosophers, I mean philosophers who are with us or who have left us recently. And moreover, this contemporary Indian philosophy is a broad term. It actually starts with Raja Ram Mohan Rao. So, like the Western tradition, where we say contemporary Western philosophy and also recent Western philosophy, it's high time for us to discuss the recent Indian philosophy. Thinkers like S.S. Barlinge, Professor Sundararajan, Professor D.P. Chattopadhyaya, Professor Dayakrishna, right, Rajendra Prasad, Suresh Chandra, K. Chachandamurthy, K.M.P. Mahadevan, R. Balasubramanian could be placed in this group. And what this program we are planning to have once in 2 months. So this being the centenary, in fact, last year was the centenary year of Professor K.S. Murthy Garu, and his birthday was celebrated on 25th September. So I thought let us start with the Professor K.S. Murthy. And after this lecture, that is next series of lecture will be on Professor Ramu Gandhi. Perhaps we'll do it in the month of November. So we'll introduce all these thinkers to our own young teachers of philosophy. That is the purpose and the aim of this program. That is reading our tradition in recent Indian philosophy. Reading our tradition in recent Indian philosophy. So keeping this at the backdrop, we thought that let us discuss the Professor K. Chachandamurthy. I'll start with the 2 short quotations. One quotation is from Shankara. Not know the tradition, even he is well versed in all the sciences, is to be ignored as fool. Shankara. Then Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru says, today India swings between the blind adherence to her old customs and a slavish imitation of foreign ways. In either of these can she find relief or life or growth. true culture derives its inspiration from every corner of the world, but it is homegrown. This is very important. It should be homegrown. In fact, there are many contemporary thinkers like K.C. Bhattacharya, because K.C. Bhattacharya has written a very beautiful essay entitled Indian Ideas, wherein he talks about how there is always cultural subjugation. So we must be rooted in our own tradition. So all the recent Indian philosophers whom I mentioned and whom we are going to discuss, they have developed their philosophical discourses based on Indian tradition. So Sachinandamurti is one such a philosopher who has talked about the tradition in detail, but also he is the one who has interpreted the tradition. He is one of the important thinkers of the 21st century, 20th or 21st century, who has made a significant contribution to recent Indian philosophy. And he taught philosophy for more than 35 years and lectured in various universities, both East and West. And he also served as a vice chancellor. And he is also a recipient of Dr. B.C. Roy National Award and also Padma Bhushan from the President of India. And what is interesting is that he has written on various fields of philosophy. He was the first one to write Far Eastern philosophy, peace studies, Indian culture, and philosophy. He is a versatile scholar. For the first time, he wrote on the Taoism, Confucianism, thus introducing the Far Eastern philosophy for our younger generation. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two important works of Professor Murthy. The first book which I would like to discuss with you is Revelation and Reason in India in Advaita Vedanta. This is the magnum opus of Professor Murthy, and I have been very much influenced by this book. And also another book which we are going to take up for discussion very briefly, of course, is the Vedic hermeneutics. These two books we shall discuss very briefly in order to say, in order to understand perhaps the significance of Professor Murthy in the 21st century. According to Professor Murthy, there are difficulties with regard to the concept of Maya and also of Brahman. He asks this question: how can Maya Avidya, which is beginningless, have an end? By whom and how was it known that Avidya has an end? These are some of the questions raised by him. And also he says that the doctrine of non-dual Brahman is contradictory and so logically untenable, according to Professor Murthy. And what is interesting is Murthy has an interdisciplinary approach, which is rare among the philosophers, because his interdisciplinary approach has given a new dimension to the philosophical problems. And for this reason, one can say that he is a philosopher of inclusiveness. The philosophy of inclusiveness is based on three concepts, according to me. One is that one should make an interdisciplinary approach by connecting both Indian and Western. For this reason, one can call Professor Murthy as a philosopher of inclusiveness, and also how he is able to connect the past with that of the present. Here he is using hermeneutical method in order to develop the inclusiveness, the philosophy of inclusiveness. And thirdly, the philosopher of inclusiveness has as a method by which he can show the hermeneutical circle, or he can show the whole part relation. So on these three aspects, one can consider Professor Murthy as a philosopher of inclusiveness. In fact, Murthy is not in favor of the distinction which we normally make between Indian and Western philosophy. Its statement is quite interesting. The term Indian philosophy is itself perplexing, he says. Nobody talks about Indian physics, Indian astronomy, and or Indian biology. We have philosophy just as we have economics and geology. All peoples of the world have made contribution to these sciences. So this is a very pertinent statement with regard to the distinction quite often we make between Indian and Western. And there is another interesting book which I may refer very briefly is the philosophy in India. It's a very very interesting book wherein he made a country survey. I would say he has asked many of the heads of the department to give the country report. I mean to the department report, so that one can know what type of philosophy we are preaching and whether any modification is necessary, etc., etc. So this book, Philosophy in India, is a very important book because he talks about the three conceptions of philosophy which is prevalent in India at different periods. He says the first type of philosophy which is practiced in India is that philosophy as the rational, critical, and illuminating review of the content of theology, economics, and political science. And the second type of philosophy is philosophy as a system of ideas comprising epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. And the third type of philosophy that is practiced in India is philosophy is the intuitive network of views regarding man, his nature, and destiny. By stating these three types of philosophy that are dealt in Indian philosophical tradition by our philosophers, Murthy says the second conception of philosophy is found in Sanskrit, Pali, and Prakrit sources, and the third is expressed in Indian languages. But he says, unfortunately, philosophers in India are concerned on one type of philosophy that is practiced. But he says, in order to understand Indian philosophy in general, or in order to have a comprehensive picture of Indian philosophy, all the three conceptions of philosophy must be taken together. This is a very beautiful statement of Professor Murthy. So here also you can see is a philosophy of inclusiveness. And another point which I would like to make at this context is that how the contemporary Indian philosophy has developed from 1917. One can classify the development of contemporary Indian philosophy from 1917 onwards. That is, the first period is from 1917 to 1947. This perhaps the contemporary Indian philosophy has developed from this period, perhaps. And the second is from 1947 onwards. Now, Professor Murthy would say that during 1917 to 20, Gandhi became the leader and Aurobindo's philosophy became very prominent. These are the two great contributions which has emerged in the contemporary Indian philosophy. Similarly, Radhakrishnan, he says, as an interpreter of Indian philosophy, has given a new dimension to philosophical discourses. So this is between 1917 to 1948, 47. But Murthy says, in the post-independent period, we come across three important works. One is the current trends of Indian philosophy, published in 1972, edited by two people, that is Professor K. Chaitanya and Ramakrishna Rao. And second is Contemporary Indian Philosophy, published in 1974, edited by Margaret Chatterjee. And third is Indian Philosophy Today, edited by 1975, edited by Devaraja. Now, what is interesting is, though these three books played a very important, edited volumes, I mean, played a very important role, What is important is that all these three books, which edited volumes, basically dealt with the Western philosophical thinking. The articles published in these books, in these edited volumes, deal mostly with Western philosophical issues, and discussion on Indian philosophy is very meager or very less. So, it has been argued by many critics that Indian philosophy has lost its direction, and if at all it has to survive, there must be some direction. Why did this problem occur? The problems that are faced by Indian philosophers are due to lack of Sanskrit knowledge and also partly due to the influence of a anti-metaphysical trend in Anglo-American analytic philosophy, which has produced a rift, a sort of crisis of communication among traditional scholars. So, in fact, one can say some Indian scholars believed that there is no Indian philosophy that has developed after 15th century. This is one view, of course. And there are many scholars like Ahayananda Bharati from USA. He said there is no proper development in the contemporary Indian philosophy. These are some of the Indian criticism that has been leveled against contemporary Indian philosophy. But this is a fact. This is a question which we have to analyze in the context of K.S. Murthy, because it has been argued by many scholars that the classical Indian philosophy has contributed, or substantially it has given a new methodology for understanding Indian philosophical problems. But in the contemporary philosophy, there is no progress. This is a major criticism. But this is a fact, this is a question. If we read thinkers in the contemporary period, because it is said that there is no proper textbook or proper Indian philosophy books after Udayana, 10th century. And in fact, if you read any classical Indian philosophy book, it will end up with Madhva. After that, there is no progress. So there is a need. The criticism is to some extent is valid, but at the same time, should we simply say that there is no proper development or proper method of understanding Indian philosophy, or we have not developed new techniques after Madhva? This is the question which we have to elaborate. We have to, if we read many thinkers like Sumijivan Bhattacharya, who has applied the mathematical logic, for example, in order to understand Abhinaya, and also B.K. Matilal, who made a comparative study of both Indian and Western, and similarly J.N. Mohanty, a great Indian phenomenologist who is well versed with both Indian philosophy as well as Western philosophy, and Professor Arindam Chakravarti, who has contributed substantially for both Indian and Western philosophy, and Professor R. Balasubramaniam, who is also another Indian phenomenologist, but rooted in Indian tradition, especially Advaita Vedanta, in Indian tradition, and Professor Dayaji, who has revolted against the tradition. I'm saying this because he believed that Indian philosophy is quite often considered as something spiritual, which he says it is not true. And also it is said he talks about three myths of Indian philosophy. So there are some scholars who have just mentioned, whom I mentioned. They accepted tradition, some revolted against the tradition. But in order to understand contemporary, whether it is contemporary Indian philosophy or recent Indian philosophy, we should know the fact that tradition plays a very important role. Because tradition, as Gadamer would say, is that which connects the past, present, and the future. And moreover, tradition, if tradition has got two aspects. One is the center and the periphery. There may be some changes in the periphery, in the outer structure of the tradition. but the core of the tradition cannot be changed. So there, and here I would like to make a distinction between tradition and orthodoxy. Now, tradition, you can always make some certain amendments or changes. It allows you to make certain changes in the tradition. But with regard to orthodoxy, it is something static. It is very rigid. But tradition is not like that. Tradition always allow you to make certain changes in order to suit the community or in order to suit people. So this is something very important. So this we have to keep in mind while reading a great person like Professor Murthy. And Professor Murthy, as I said just now, I will be discussing because now my basic idea is to introduce Professor Murthy to our young scholars and teachers. There are great people like Samasya Prasad, who is well versed than me, of course, in K.S. Murthy's philosophy. He has worked very detailed study on K.S. Murthy, and also Rajini is there, Professor Rajini, the Vice Chancellor. These people have made significant contribution with regard because Rajini is a direct student of Professor Murthy. So these scholars, they have done a lot of work on Professor Murthy, but my humble attempt here is to introduce Professor Murthy to our young scholars. This is just beginning, and we can't discuss all the 25 plus 13 Telugu books, 37 books we can't discuss with the 45 minutes. So I am just introducing Professor Murthy to our younger generation. That is a basic aim of reading tradition in Indian context. So, as I said in the beginning, I'll take up only two books. Revelation, because this revelation reason in Advaita Vedanta is the magnum opus, and it is something remarkable work. In fact, it is a PhD thesis. If I would request all young teachers and students to read this book, you can see how a PhD thesis should be. He has given a beautiful methodology. Though he talks about revelation and reason in Advaita Vedanta, he just elaborately discusses the methodology of the West. This is something very remarkable in K.S. Murthy. And also one should know how he has used two methods. One is the analytic method and also the hermeneutic method in this book. Because now he is fond of hermeneutics. Similarly, he is fond of analytic philosophy. In fact, when I met him, when he was the UGC vice chairman, he asked me to read Professor Ganeshwar Mishra's, he's from Utkal University, Ganeshwar Mishra's two important books, two short books. One is very small book. One is Advaita, the Method and Limits, and another is the Linguistic Philosophy of Indian Philosophy or something like that. These are two small books, but he asked me to read these two books in order to develop the analytical bent of mind in order to understand Indian philosophical problems. So you can see the method of analysis in the book Revelation, Reason and Revelation. And similarly, the Vedic, and a few days ago, we had an international conference seminar in Andhra University. I and Professor Samasya Prasad and Professor Rajini were there. And where we discussed different dimensions of Professor Murthy. About his critique of Gandhi, that's what Professor Samasya Prasad has presented. And some presented his understanding of Far Eastern philosophy. So Murthy is a multi-dimensional philosopher who could talk about different approaches to philosophy. So that is the reason why we consider him as a philosophy of inclusiveness. In his philosophy, one can include different aspects of philosophy. He was not a narrow-minded person. This I have to record, because the question quite often comes to one's mind is he an Advaitin? As because he has written the book on revelation and reason. Easier Advaitin? No. For me, he is more towards bending towards Vishishtadvaita. This is what I have seen, and Professor Samasva Prasad would also agree my statement. So I'll take very briefly these two books, Vedic Hermeneutics and Revelation and Reason, and let us see how he has applied a new methodology in Indian tradition in order to show the philosophy of inclusiveness. In fact, Murthy Garu applies this method to understand the nature of Brahman. Because the question which bothers the analytical philosopher is, we talk about language or we use language, right, in order to talk about the empirical things. So language is a method of communication, or it is used as a tool of communication in order to communicate all our ideas and thoughts in the empirical field. So it is fine. But how do we understand the nature of Brahman? How do we understand the word Brahman as such? Whether it has got any meaning? Because what we do is, this word is not like a table or a chair, where you can just point out and say, well, this is a table or this is a chair, this is a laptop, all this is possible. But can we say something and say, oh, this is Brahman? That is a question which is very important in the context of Advaita Vedanta, whether language can explain the nature of Brahman. So if we can't use language in order to understand Brahman, then what is the purpose of using language? Whether language will be a failure to explain the nature of the supreme reality. This is a question. So one can see the method of the synthetical method or the holistic method or the inclusive method in Murthy, where you can see the merge between Indian and Western philosophical tradition. Now, one main question, which he has discusses in this book, Advaita Method and Limit. Sorry, this Revelation and Reason and Advaita Vedanta, is this language and Brahman. So he is asking the question: how do we understand Brahman in quotes by language? Because he says that we always use language to refer to empirical things. Because a word, if it is meaningful, we know the denotational theory of Western understanding, right? So a word denotes something if it is meaningful. This is a denotational theory, how we understand denotational theory. The word denotes something and it gains its meaning. So a word denotes an object or thing, but how do we understand the word Brahman occurring in the Upanishads? This is a question raised by Professor K.S.M. How do we understand the word Brahman which occurs in the Upanishads? What meaning do we assign to the word Brahman? Because it is neither an object nor a thing which can be pointed out by means of language. So, he is trying to tell us how the word Brahman can gain its meaning by using the etymology as well as grammar, which can serve as a tool for understanding Brahman. In fact, very briefly, I would like to discuss how he talks about the methodology. He says, Shankara, in all his commentaries, tries to drive home the idea that Brahman can never be described. That means description of Brahman is not possible, but can only be shown. This is very important. Brahman can only be shown approximately. This word is important. Approximately. So he suggests, our KSM suggests the following method. The first method he suggests is, Brahman is shown by the method of Adhyaropa and Apavada. Because in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, Shankara says Brahman is neither Sat nor Asat. And Kesam says Brahman is incapable of being related to the words. This means words fail to explain the nature of Brahman. Brahman cannot be described by the word is or is not. For the supersensuous reality can never be described by the word is or is not. So, Murthy Garu says, any object which we talk about in this empirical world must belong to a genus, jati, or it must be an act or kriya, or it must refer to a quality or guna, or it must point to the relation or sambandha. But further he says, Brahman is beyond everything, beyond all these things, right? And hence the word cannot describe what Brahman is. So, how do we understand Brahman then? Kesam says, through superimposition, that is adhyaropa, one can understand Brahman. But my teacher, Professor Balasubramaniam, would say, adhyaropa and apavada. Apavada, we know it is a negation. So one can say it is superimposition and negation. But Professor R.B. would say it is not mere negation, it is a subsequent negation. The word he would always stress the word subsequent negation. Subsequent negation, of course, we mean it is immediate negation. For example, the text says, Brahman has hands, legs, eyes, heads, faces, and ears on all sides, encompassing all it stands. Okay, this is a superimposition. And immediately this is rejected. This is what we call subsequent negation, right? If Brahman is described as it moves, then immediately it is negated in the very next sentence. For example, in the Isha Upanishad, it says, that moves. Look at this passage, where you can see the hermeneutical technique or method adopted in the Isha Upanishads, which has been elaborately discussed by K. Isha Upanishad says, that moves. Then immediately it is said, that does not move. That is far off. That is very near. That is inside all. And that is outside all. Now, in this passage of Isha, you can see both affirmation and negation. And this negation is subsequent negation. Now, Murthy Garu says that by this adhyaropa and apavada, one can make an attempt to understand the nature of Brahman. So, Brahman can be shown in this way. And secondly, he says Brahman can be shown by the method of lakshana. We are familiar with this two kinds of lakshana, that is Swarupa lakshana as well as a Tatastha lakshana. The Vedanta text define Brahman in terms of essential nature, namely Brahman is existence, intelligence, and infinitude. That is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. And the Vedanta text which says that Brahman is that from which these beings are born, and that by which they live, and that into which they finally enter. So it defines Brahman in terms of a certain accidental attribute. So what Professor Murthy Garu says is that by using Swarupa Lakshana as well as Tatastha Lakshana, one can understand the nature of Brahman. So this is another way of showing the nature of Brahman. Because already he said Brahman cannot be described. So the first method which he has suggested in order to show Brahman is adhyaropa and apavada, and the second is this what is that lakshana. And also he says when we say Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, right? This is the definition given by the Advaitins. Shankara also talks about that in detail. When we say Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, the word Satyam cannot be taken in a literal sense of the term. We cannot take the literal meaning of the word Satyam. Then, what do you use the word Satyam? The word Satyam is used in order to say that Brahman is different from Asatyam. That's all. There you have to stop. So, if you take the literal meaning, then you are giving some qualifications to Brahman, which the Advaitins would not accept. So, by this Adhyaropa and Apavada, as well by Lakshana, one can understand the nature of Brahman. Of course, similarly, we can say, Muthigaru's third method of understanding Brahman. He says Brahman can be shown by Netivada. Of course, we know what this is, not this, not this. For example, by using in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the commentary of Shankara goes like this. Now, therefore, Adesa of Brahman, not this, not this. Truly, there is no other or a better word than this. So, by using this methodology, Kesam says, by though we failed, we cannot give a positive description of Brahman. Brahman can be shown by eliminating all the possible specification. Brahman can be known. Now, Shankara in his Bhashya makes it clear that Brahman is so unique that no words can describe it. But somehow it must be talked of words drawn from ordinary language. This is important. The words drawn from ordinary language have to be used. And very beautifully, this is a very beautiful statement of Professor Murthy. I always rejoice when I read this statement. I'll read this. Murthy says, while no description of Brahman is possible, right? The task of the Vedanta is to teach about it. So, logically speaking, it is an appropriate. But only in this way can the Vedanta emphasize the mystery of Brahman, which eludes all objective language, and yet it can be dealt with only in that way if Brahman has to be talked about intelligibly, unquote. This is a very beautiful quotation of Murthy. In short, we can say what he's trying to say is that we can't use language in order to talk about Brahman. But it is only language you can say something about Brahman. So, though we have the limitation of language, we have to say something. The objective language, in short, can never explain the nature of Brahman. And he further says that since our language cannot explain what Brahman is, words are used conjunctively. This is what Professor Murthy says. He says, as any one of these terms by itself is misleading and does not give a complete idea, they are used conjunctively, such that one term serves as an adjective to the other. In other words, it qualifies the other. They either elevate our conception of Brahman or remove from our conception of all finiteness and limit. So, this method which Kesam prescribes or suggests is something very important. Perhaps I would say for the first time, as far as I know, I may be wrong also, that in Advaitic Vedanta, or in order to interpret Advaita Vedanta, language is used, how the analytical tools is used in order to understand the significance of Brahman, though it cannot be explained by positive terms. And also, Professor Murthy talks about the relational sentences where he says samsarga na avagagi vakyas can explain the nature of Brahman. Let me explain that very briefly. There are relational statements. There are two kinds of statements. One is samsarga avagagi and samsarga na avagagi. When we say samsarga avagagi vakya, where there is a relational or there is a relation between subject and the predicate. When I say the pot is blue, that the potness is characterized by the blueness. So we always say the rose is red, for example. So there is always a subject predicate relation. These are samsarga avagagi vakyas. But there is also another type of vakyas, right? Which can explain, which alone can explain the nature of Brahman. What is that? Samsarga na avagagi vakya. That is non-relational sentences. The non-relational sentences are those sentences where the subject-predicate relation is absent. The identity statement, for example, the Mahavakyas, where the subject-predicate relation you don't see in the Mahavakyas Tattvamasi. When we say that thou art, or this is Brahman, that thou art, you see the absence of a subject and predicate. So he says, only by this relation, that is non-relational sentences, you can try to understand the nature of Brahman. And also, we should remember, according to K.S. Murthy, language has got two dimensions. This is very important. Language has got two dimensions. Though language is analyzed basically, right? Though language is basically used in order to talk about the concept of meaning or reference or the relation between a word and object. A word, when a meaningful word denotes something, the denotational theory of J.S. Mill, for example. So this is an ordinary way of using language. So in the empirical sphere of life, language is used in order to explain concept of meaning. In short, we can say meaning, reference, etc., etc. Okay, but language is also used. This is very important. Language is also used. This is a view of Kayism. Language is also used in order to say something about the nature of Brahman. It is true that language has its limitation and cannot communicate the nature of Brahman directly. It is only through language, at least something can be said about Brahman. So, keeping this in mind, we can say Indian thinkers of the past have made the distinction between the secular verbal testimony and non-secular or Vedic testimony. So, the former is used in order to explain the functions of language in the linguistic community, and the later is used as a source of knowledge of Brahman. In this context, I would like to mention the great contribution made by Professor Harold G. Coward, a Canadian philosopher, who wrote on Bhartrhari, Bhartrhari and Derrida. He says Indian philosophy postulated that language has both the phenomenal and metaphysical dimension. This is very important. So when we use language in order to communicate our ideas or thought, it comes under the framework, the phenomenal dimension of language. But there is also, Coward says, there is also the metaphysical dimension of language. What is that? He says it is remarkable that the ancient hymns of the Rig Veda, his semi-technical vocabulary was already developed to deal with such linguistic matters as language, composition, poetic creation, inspiration, illumination, etc. So, Coward says a careful observation of Indian philosophical tradition would tell us that Indian philosophers, ancient Indian philosophers, have used language in both the phenomenal as well as the metaphysical understanding. And also, this has been emphasized by another great thinker. He's an Indian from Kerala, but settled in Canada. His name is J.G. Arapura. Arapura is a well-known philosopher who wrote a very beautiful book on Advaita and the hermeneutical tradition. Arapura also says that the mystery of language is that in the tradition of Vedanta, what language was plunged into was consciousness per se, rather than understanding man. I quote Professor Arapura. He says, "Language is the means by which we can plunge into depth of our own consciousness." Unquote. So I have taken support of these two great philosophers, Professor Coward as well as J.J. Arapura, in order to claim the methodology which our Professor KSM has adopted is valid always. So we have to salute Professor Murthy for giving us a new method of understanding the nature of Brahman by language. This is a brief analysis of a part of the chapter. That is, there is one chapter called Brahman and language. So I have taken some aspects of this, that is Brahman and language, where we have talked about how Brahman can be shown in the inverted commas. With this, I would like to very briefly examine another book of Professor Murthy. That book is a very interesting book, a small book running into say 110 pages or something like that. The title of the book is Vedic Hermeneutics, which was written by Professor Murthy in the year 1993. Uh, it's a very beautiful book. He examines how the Vedic understanding of Indian tradition, or with the Vedic tradition, has given a new dimension to the so-called hermeneutics. Because all of us know hermeneutics, though is not something new, it has become a very important method of philosophizing in the West in the 19th century. After the emergence of Dilthey, Schleiermacher, Heidegger, Gadamer, Ricker, and many others, it has become a very prominent method of philosophizing. And if you look at our own tradition very closely, we would understand that we too have this hermeneutical method. Though we have not used the term hermeneutics, we have used the bhashyas or commentaries or interpretation, which is playing a very important role in understanding the Vedanta, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, the three schools of Vedanta, Advaita, Vishtadvaita, and Dvaita. Now, this book has a lot of significance. I would like to start with the backside, that is the cover. That is a very beautiful jacket design of made by Professor Arindam Chakravarti, because this has got a lot of implication, because this has a close link with what I am going to say. So let me read a brief, it is a very small passage given by Arindam. I would like to read it, because wherein he is trying to explain how the interpretive tradition plays an important role. He says, the, the interpretation is not merely uttering the words. The interpreter is not merely uttering words, but wishes to unveil truth. And of course, truth is paradigmatically represented by the sun, because if you see the book of Vedic hermeneutics, you can see it is very attractive picture that is drawn. So in that, truth is paradigmatically represented by the sun. Hence, through closed eyes, that is, the eyes are closed to the world but open inwardly, and the interpreter meditates on the sun, on the fire of words, comes from the role of sun in Plato's dialogue. Now, actually, he compares, Professor Arindam makes a comparison between this and Plato's cave. And this is a starting point for my discussion on the Vedic hermeneutics, where I would like to take three important aspects. One is interpretation of the Veda, and secondly, interpretative methodology which is adopted, and three, interpretative freedom through tarka. These are the three aspects which Professor Murthy adopts in developing this inclusive method. I remember I in the beginning said there is a close proximity between the first text of Murthy, that was a PhD thesis, as I said the beginning, Revelation, Reason, and Advaita Vedanta, that was his PhD thesis. And later, this book, this Vedic hermeneutics, you can closely see a link, the proximity. In fact, in this book itself, Professor Murthy mentions about the earlier book which I just now said, that is Revelation and Reason in Advaita. So you can see the hermeneutical role, uh, hermeneutical thread otherwise, which can connect the earlier book, namely the Revelation and Reason, and then this Vedic hermeneutics. So three aspects I am going to discuss very briefly. One is interpretation of the Vedas, then interpretative methodology, then interpretative freedom through Tarka. Now, before doing that, let me explain the hermeneutic circle, which plays a very important role in this text. Now, in the hermeneutic circle, you can see the whole and part relation. The whole part relation is something very important. So, Gadamer would say, in order to understand a text, you should grasp the whole meaning of the text. The whole meaning of the text is possible provided you know the parts of the text. So, in short, let me explain this in this way. We want to understand a passage, for example, a paragraph. Let me put it in simple way. If you want to understand a particular paragraph in a book, you should not only know the entire paragraph but also know the individual sentences as well the meaning of each and individual words, because each and every word is connected to a sentence and one sentence is connected to the other, which forms part and parcel of a paragraph or a passage. So you can see the whole part relation not only in a particular paragraph but in the entire text. So there is a unity or there is a synthesis between the earlier part of the text and the later part of the text. There is always a continuity. The author or the interpreter, because I'm more going to concentrate on interpreter only, the bhashyas or the commentaries. There is a close connection between the earlier part and the later part. The author will not contradict himself. Throughout the text, there is a running thread. You have to connect that and see how the text is connected to the first part and the last part. Some might say that there is some contradiction. That contradiction will never occur in a text. If you say that there is some contradiction which you can see in the text, then that is our misreading of the text. So when the author writes something, he will never allow this contradiction. It cannot take place. So if at all there is a contradiction, we have to say that it is an apparent contradiction. So this apparent contradiction has to be resolved. So here also you can see how Professor KSM operates the philosophy of inclusiveness. The text as a whole is inclusive. It contains all the elements. So if you want to know the text, then the entire meaning of the text must be grasped. The entire chapters, all the chapters of the text must be grasped so that you can see the hermeneutical method or you can see the philosophy of inclusiveness. So let me explain this with the first one, namely interpretation of the Vedas. Murthy talks about how the Vedas are interpreted in three ways. He says, because this interpretation plays a very important role. I always say that the interpreter plays a more important role than that of the author. there is always a limitation to the text. When the author writes something, okay, there is always some compulsion. It is something like that, we'll be writing the thesis at one time or other. We think that it has to be completed and we have to submit and get the degree. Though this is not a very good analogy, what I'm trying to say is that there is always one example I can give from the Western philosophical tradition is Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant wrote this critique of pure reason, and he wanted to revise it. Huh? He was keeping the text for more than 12 years. He could not do that. So at one juncture, he thought he has to publish it because he fell ill and all that one. So the author has that compulsion, some sort of compulsion. But the interpreter has a more role to play because the interpreter gives the reader an opportunity to elaborate the text. He gives elaborate meaning to the text. The text, which is always limited, is now expanded by the commentator or the bhashya. That is the reason why he gave more importance to the bhashyas or the commentaries or vartikas, right? So all these play a very important role. So there is always the role of interpreter. Without the interpreter, one cannot understand the text. And not only that, in hermeneutics, all of us know that the text is open-ended. There is nothing called a closed text. The text is open-ended, means the text can give meaning and then we can interpret it, then we can reinterpret. So it depends on the context in which the text has emerged. So when the context change, the meaning also would change. So all this is possible in the case of a text. So the text is always open-ended. It gives more scope for the reader to interpret it. So when the text comes to my hand, I have the liberty to interpret it, but without making uh, hermeneutic violence. I would call it hermeneutic violence. If there is time, I'll discuss that later. Now, once again, we'll go back to the interpretation of the Veda. He says that Vedas can be interpreted in three ways. One is, one can give, he says, Murti says, these are all Murti's words. Murtiji says that there is the ritualistic interpretation wherein the ritualists play a very important role as a source book, what to be done and what not to be done. So this is one way of reading the Vedas, one interpretation. That is the ritualistic interpretation. And another way of interpreting the Vedic text or the Vedic interpretation, the second type, Murti says, accepted the Vedic gods, he says the Vedic gods as realities and rituals as acts of worship. So this is another way of understanding, another way of interpreting the Vedas. And the third is very important. He says the Vedas have been interpreted monotheistically. This is very important. For example, Murti says, Yashka in the Nirukta, for example, says that all the gods mentioned in the Vedas are the limbs of one great self. Yes, Captain. So these three are three ways of interpreting the Vedas. That is, one can see merely the ritualistic interpretation of the Veda, or one can see the realistic interpretation where we can consider God as a reality. God has to be as something to be worshipped. And the third is a monotheistic interpretation of the Vedas. So this is the method of interpretation which Professor Murti has given us. He says, I would like to quote Murti here. Murti says that let the students of, very beautiful quotation. He says that let the students of Veda Bhashyas in all Padasalas be exposed to the Bhashyas not only of Sayana but also to Madhva, Dayananda, Kapali Shastri, and others. So, unquote, what Professor Murthy is saying is that it is high time for us to read the text not only of Sayana but also the Vedantic thinkers like, though he has not mentioned about Ramanuja, we can also include Ramanuja, Madhva, and others. So, this is the first point, namely the Vedic interpretation or interpretation which one can see in the Vedas. And the second, I said, is the interpretative methodology. What is this methodology? As I said just now, it is here Murthy compares this method with this previous method which is developed in Reason and Revelation, which is published in 1974. He talks about the interpretative methodology which is acceptable to both the Advaitins and the Mimamsakas. And he says that there is a need for both the Mukhya Artha of a sentence, passage, etc., and also he says the best, I would say, the best interpretative methodology is very much visible in the Vedanta and the Mimamsakas. It is true that there are many Western scholars also who argue that hermeneutics of Indian philosophy could be seen in Advaita Vedanta as well as the Mimamsakas. It's a very valid point. Of course, we can also relate it to other systems of philosophy or other schools of philosophy. So, what Murthy is saying here is that the Mukhya Artha has to be taken into account because the Mukhya Artha, the passage is important. The sentence are important because I just now said that there is a close link between the whole and the part, the passage as well as the sentences as well as the words. And also he says we have to take into account the purport or tatparya, what the author is trying to say, what the interpreter is trying to say in the particular passage. So the tatparya, otherwise we can call it as the contextual meaning is important. Let me connect this with the modern tools of hermeneutics, which many of our hermeneutical thinkers have developed. When I am reading the text, for example, when I am reading the Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, few centuries. Now, when I read the text, I cannot enter into that meaning because the historicity, the culture, all this play a dominant role in shaping the meaning of the text. When the author writes something, he is guided by three principles. One is he is guided by the principle of tradition. There is a surrounding tradition in which he is operating. And secondly, the second principle of interpretation is there is always interpretation and understanding. We can't separate these two. When something is interpreted, we try to understand something. When we try to understand something, we are interpreting something. And third is language. So language, according to the hermeneutics, modern hermeneutics, one can say, is the core of hermeneutics. So these are the three principles of hermeneutics which play a dominant role. So one can say the context in which the which was written long back has to be decontextualized because modern hermeneuticians like Paul Ricoeur and they talk about what is called decontextualized or recontextualized. So that context is removed and we place the text in my present historicity and my present tradition from the text. This is very important. Otherwise, the text becomes static, right? Hermeneutical method suggests that it should be like a flow of a river. It can't be stagnant. So the hermeneuticians always take into account the context or the tatparya or the purport which play a dominant role in shaping the meaning of the text. And this is very important. Unless we understand the significance of the context, it is very difficult for us to understand the meaning of the text. And the third, you remember, I said the third point is the interpretative freedom through tarka. So that is what I said. The author has certain limitation, but the interpreter has got more freedom. So the interpretative freedom is something which Professor KSM has developed in a very beautiful way. He says that there should be coherent coordination. If you fail to understand the coherent coordination which is presented, then the meaning is lost. We fail to understand the meaning of the text. So this coherent coordination is possible. One can understand the possibility, provided you have the freedom to interpret the text. Professor Murthy, by quoting Dharmaraja, he says, knowledge of the tatparya of a sentence is essential condition for knowledge of its meaning. So the interpretative freedom, Murthy is arguing in favor of the contextual meaning. And in fact, he points out the six criteria which are very much essential for understanding the Tatparya. The first one is the unity including passages. The recurrence of the theme. Third is the new conclusion sought to be brought out. Fourth is the fruitfulness of such a conclusion. Fifth is the of throughout the text. Then finally, the argument which runs throughout the text. So these are actually known as sadlingas. These are the six criteria which are essential while interpreting the text. Of these six, the first one is the foremost. So let me explain that. That is the unity of the initial and passages. What is that? Remember, I said there is a continuity between what the author has said in the beginning and the end. So we must be in a position to connect the beginning and the end. This is what we call the inclusiveness. We can't simply stop with the initial understanding of the text. The entire only you can understand the meaning of the text. So the text gives the meaning, or the meaning is hidden in the initial as well as the concluding passage. So the coordination that exists between the front and the last page, or say the initial page and the last page, is very much essential, and that gives the clear-cut methodology for understanding this. So what is surprising is, now these are some of the methods, the three methods which I suggested, right? Is something very important, and of course they are remarkable. But what is surprising is that long back, in this book, as I said just now, this book was published. This Vedic, a very beautiful book, I should say. You must read this book as well as the other book, the Revelation and Reason. What is surprising is that the modern tools of hermeneutics, the methodology which you have developed recently, in the past, say, shall we say, uh, uh, 30 or 40 years, if I'm right. So these were very much anticipated, perhaps, by Professor Murthy, and I would call him as the modern hermeneutician, for the main reason that he has given us a new methodology of the interpretative technique by which one can understand the significance of the philosophical text. So what I would like to say as my final word with regard to Murthy's understanding of the text as well as interpretation is Murthy's methodology is something remarkable for the main reason that his philosophy of inclusiveness is able to connect the past with that of the present, and it will also help us to go further, that is in future. So as Gadamer has said, the past, present and future are interconnected. So this methodology is something marvelous, I would say. So for this reason, one can say that he is a philosopher of inclusiveness who has given a new or a hermeneutical method of understanding the text or the method. So Murthy should be remembered, as I said in the beginning, that this is just introduction. I cannot discuss, unfortunately, the entire philosophical discourse of Murthy. I just have one glimpse where you can see how he has thrown light on the modern issues like interpretative technology. So that is possible that you can understand provided you are text together. So similarly, is writing on Far Eastern philosophy and concept of peace, the Indian spirit. These are some of his important texts, and also uh, his peace studies is something which is very very important, and his concept of education. All these are so he's a versatile scholar who could also, as a is an interdisciplinary philosopher who can handle different disciplines so easily. And for this reason, we are grateful to him. And in fact, personally, I'm grateful to him because I know Professor Murthy very well. He's, I would say, he's part and parcel of Madras University. He has visited our department number of times, and he has given number of lectures. Methodology is something remarkable. So let us teach our young students about the philosophy of Murthy. At least those who are in the helm of affairs, those who are in board of studies or chairman of board of studies, board members, they should see that our own philosophers' philosophy should be included in the curriculum. Very high time. If we are not going to read our own thinkers, then who will read our thinkers? It is high time that we go back to our Indian tradition. Of course, Western philosophy is very important. Nobody can deny that, but at the same time, we cannot neglect our own Indian tradition. That too, the great contribution made by the recent Indian philosophers. Of course, contemporary Indian philosophy is great and classical great, but let us read our own thinkers so that it will give us a new direction for understanding. So, with these few words, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this nice opportunity of sharing. This is just increasing a thinker, that's all, not more than that. So, with this, I stop, and if there are some questions, I will be very happy to answer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Das, Professor Rao, Professor Maharana, and other friends who have joined this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very nice presentation. So now it is 8 p.m. So we shall go for the discussion. So I shall invite Dr. Alok Tandon ji. Sir, please have your observation. We shall start from you, Dr. Alok Tandon ji. Professor Sambhashi Prasad ji, please have your observation, sir. Professor Prasad ji.
Yes.
Yes,
Just I would
yes.
like to speak a few words. It is always a pleasure to listen to my dear friend, Professor Panneerselvam. After listening, after listening his lecture, always we have a satisfaction. I have a satisfaction that I have learned something from his lecture. So also, I am very happy that I could be able to listen today Professor Panneerselvam's lecture on inclusiveness of Professor Satchidanandamurthy, philosophy of inclusiveness of Satchidanandamurthy. I am very happy about that. And Professor Murthy has not only, it is not a question, sir, but it's only some observations I am making. Professor Murthy, not only his writings, not only include on Vedanta, Buddhism, and on education, on peace studies, but also he has written on Far Eastern philosophies, as Professor Panneerselvam rightly said. I remember is in this context, I would like to read, especially, I would like to read a few lines from my paper. Murthy is a philosopher of inclusiveness. He wants to perceive with a holistic approach. No doubt Murthy values ontology, metaphysics, and logic. However, he considered that religious, moral, social, and political issues should not be ignored. He wrote, those who are completely engaged in ontology, metaphysics, analysis of formal logic, or history of philosophy are contributing equally valuable work. But there seems to be a moral and professional obligation on the part of a philosopher to conduct his inquiries relating to religious, moral, social, and political matters. Murthy considers that Indian culture should not be identified with Hinduism alone because Islam and Christianity are as much Indian as Hinduism. Similarly, Charvaka, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism are as much Indian philosophies as Vedanta. Murthy has brought out the underlying factors of Indian thought, which is the philosophy of inclusiveness. His philosophical outlook stands for unity. To him, though Hinduism is a religion based on Shrutis and Smritis, it has both theistic and atheistic elements. Murthy stands for the unity and understanding of all philosophies and advocates the inclusion and study of the movements and schools of ancient India. He writes that the Tamil Sangam poetry that stood for the egalitarian ideas, the Alvars and Nayanars, which were primarily responsible for Bhakti movement, the saints, Siddhas, and the Gurus of the Middle Age, which have perpetuated glorious ideas of the Indian mind and life, are important. Similarly, Murthy contended that while writing on contemporary Indian philosophy, the contributions of Narayana Guru, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and B.R. Ambedkar should not be ignored. As a philosopher of inclusiveness, Murthy is in favor of intercultural understanding. These are some of the ideas which I have presented in one of my papers on Professor Murthy. And with one sentence, I want to just conclude. Namely, I came to know that when selections of lecturers on philosophy in Andhra University took place many decades back, Murthy, when he was heading the department, he said they recruited people from our Hinduism, and also Christianity. And in that context, Murthy said that if there were to be any Islamic lecturer also would be included along with these Christian lecturers and Hindu lecturers, that have been very good. So he is not only his philosophy is not only philosophy of inclusivism, he is not only a theoretical path, but in his practical life also, he has a stick and he has followed the philosophy of inclusivism. With these few words, once again thanking Professor Panneerselvam and congratulating him for his beautiful lecture, I take leave. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So now we shall invite Professor K.R. Rajan, sir. Please, sir. sir, please.
Good evening, all of you. Good
Good
evening,
evening.
sir,
Madam.
Good
Professor
evening.
Panneerselvam.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, it's a wonderful dialogue on my guru, Professor KSM, and I have learned so much from your dialogue
Thank you. Thank you.
and your observations. Your observations. Um, and also, I wish to tell all of you here who are gathered, uh, we are going to conduct a seminar, national seminar on PM Usha funds. So, on Indian knowledge system, the contribution of KSM on Indian knowledge system. And please, I request all of you could come and also have the dialogue on Professor Murthy. And also, we will give you the entire hospitality and the second AC TA, and also Professor Panneerselvam ji might be knowing the things, uh, you know, what kind of hospitality we can give you. And please come and enjoy the dialogue
Yeah.
on Professor Murthy, because he is my guru. He taught us Sino-Japanese philosophy. Uh, you know, it's my fortune to be a student, a vibrant student, and he liked me very much. I would like to give you one example that one day in the entire year, I was absent for one day, and on that day, he declared not to teach because Rajini is absent in the class, and such is the great kindness of my guru to me, and I learned so much of philosophy, and also the other things what you have said, the inclusiveness in thoughts and in practical life also. And so you said that he has written some 30 plus books, but we have with us 44 books written by him, 31 in English and 13 in Telugu and in Hindi. And Professor Ramesh is having all the works with him, and many of the books are with Andhra University Library and also our department library too. And if you want to join us in this national seminar, we will also provide the literature of Professor Murthy too. And this is my invitation from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, where I placed as Vice Chancellor. And I am honored, sir, to listen to you.
Thank you.
It's a very crucial philosophical dialogue. And, Professor Samsev Prasad, sir, I think you both will join. I'm sure of that. And we'll see whether we can hold it at his death day, January 24th around, or 18th and 19th of December. Thank you so very much,
Thank you. Thank you.
all of you learned scholars. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your information and invitation about the national seminar. Grateful. So now we shall invite Dr. T.K. Badinath, sir. Sir, if you have any observation, please share with us.
Sir, it was fascinating to hear
Yes, sir.
my teacher's lectures, sir, as usual. The moment he started speaking about tradition and other things, I was also reminded of Gadamer. He himself told about the parallels running between Gadamer and Sachidanandamurthy, sir. It was very interesting. If at all I could, it's not a doubt or something, sir. Two professors lived in two different eras or in the same era, having a what could be the same thread running between them, sir? Some commonalities. How could that happen, or is it accidental, or is it both are two genius lived at the same time, two genius prodigies living at the same period, or Can you give me some explanation regarding this?
I don't know. Maybe great people think alike. That's the
Yes,
only
sir.
way
Yes, sir.
we can say.
Because I was trying to take notes of whatever you said. I could find several things running so parallel in Gadamer's philosophy also, sir.
Yeah. Moreover, we are trying to connect with the Gadamer because this is something what we know, the modern tradition,
Yes, sir.
and Murthy's philosophy. Whether we can place him somewhere, because now when we read these two, we see certain parallels. So there is nothing wrong in making a parallel study or showing that how these elements of hermeneutics or the methodology of hermeneutics could be seen in Murthy also, Professor Murthy also. It's one way of understanding the text, and it is like applying the method what is known to us and then going back and applying it to our own tradition. So this interpretative tradition allows that. So that is what I can say.
Yes, sir. And being aware of one's tradition and being rooted in tradition, are they same or different, sir?
So rooted in tradition, when we say it is somebody is rooted in, see, everybody is rooted in a tradition.
In their own tradition.
Yeah, in your,
Yes, sir.
you are part and parcel of the tradition.
Okay, sir.
Whether you like it or not, the tradition and culture will play a role on you
Okay, sir.
because you can't think, you can't live in a vacuum.
Okay.
So you are always guided by the tradition. So you are always rooted in the tradition. You can't come out of that tradition.
Yes, sir.
You may revolt against the tradition, but you are placed in the tradition. That's all. So as I said, there may be some outer elements, which is otherwise known as periphery, that can
Oh,
be transcended
modified.
or that can be changed or modified. But the core will always remain the same. And if you challenge that core element, then you are no more in the tradition.
Sir, you are about to say something about hermeneutical violence, sir. Can you throw some light on it,
No,
sir?
no. When we are trying to read the text, we have to see whether we are doing any violence to the text.
Okay.
In fact, in this context, I saw one question by Prashant Suklaji about the interpreter. He says, "What if the interpreter reaches an absurdity?
Okay.
Would he or she still be more significant than the author of the text?" Now, this question is very interesting, and I would like to state that one cannot make what is known as the hermeneutical violence, or one cannot. By this I mean when you are interpreting the text, right?
Yes, sir.
You can't interpret. It is not possible for you to interpret the text according to your own convenience.
Okay.
So the absurdity will not arise under any circumstance because you are always operated by the text. For certain guidance is always there. So the guidelines cannot be avoided. For example, if I am interpreting Advaita Siddhi, then I can only give the Advaitic interpretation only. I cannot give my own interpretation, which can deviate from that of the tradition. So if I do that, then I am doing hermeneutic violence. So that is not allowed. So we are always guided by the principle of hermeneutics. So we have to abide by the rules which are already laid out for the interpreter. So the interpreter is always in one way is limited in the sense he cannot. By this I mean he cannot interpret the text according to his own convenience. He cannot give a wrong interpretation. He can give an interpretation which will be acceptable to all. He can recontextualize the text. All this is possible, but he cannot make any absurd statement with regard to the text which has been emphasized. I can give some example from Tamil tradition, but it may not be suitable for others, so I just leave it. So, this is what I would like to say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Abindra Vera, Radhanath Vera, sir, please. Professor Radhanath Vera, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Panneerselvam sir,
Sir,
I observed two things.
sir, tell me.
I am not I am not a formal student of philosophy.
Okay.
You may treat me as an intruder. I am from mathematics. My subject of mathematics, particularly higher mathematics, gives me a great example that a part is greater than the whole. We know normally whole consists of parts and whole is obviously greater than the parts. But higher mathematics says it is also possible through examples that part is greater than the whole. I can give you a simple, a very rudimentary example. If I take a set 1, a set S as 1, 2, 3, 4, all the integers continuing up to infinity, I multiply by 2, it becomes 2S. And obviously, the first element, 1 becomes 2, second element, 2 becomes 4, third element, 3 becomes 6. So, in order to double the number of elements in the set, I only get a half of it. So, this is how we relate whole is obviously less than the part. This is my observation. Second one is I was to attend the centenary celebration under your guidance at Andhra University. Unfortunately, I could not do it, but I sent a paper on evolution of Hinduism through the ages, uh, viewed by Professor Sachidananda Murthy.
Oh, great, great, great.
Could not make it to either present or to read it in absentia. Anyway, I could have invited your attention to that uh, small paper. And the next one is I came in contact with Professor Murthy, Sachidananda Murthy, through his published book on Radha Krishnan, his life and ideals. That was the book I gave to Andhra University as a Xerox copy in the philosophy department during Banapalli Venkatrao's regime. He is now uh, uh, reverts to his own department at Srikakulam. So, from that book, because my ideal from student days is Dr. Radhakrishnan, I was fascinated by his writings, not only of philosophy, but through other secular writings also. My question would be, can you please throw some light on? I described Radhakrishnan in my paper as a sort of grand teacher of Professor Murthy, because Professor Murthy was his student's student. So in that succession list, I described Radhakrishnan as the grand teacher of Murthy. Now, what could be the difference between the two giants coming to Andhra University? One is teacher of philosophy and vice chancellor, and the other as professor of philosophy, head of the department. Is it, as you said, Murthy was all inclusive? It's true. So also was Radhakrishnan. Radhakrishnan could be treated as his grasp of philosophy is universal, even wider than the universe. People euphemistically describe Radhakrishnan as that. So, what could be the minimum difference between the two giants coming from Andhra University? Very brief, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Beraji. Wonderful questions. First of all, with regard to this question, art is greater than the whole. This is a very interesting one. But when we apply the tools of interpretation, we normally say that this is not applicable to a mathematical sum like no 2 plus 2 makes 4, because even after 100 years I think it will be the same. but it all depends on how you read a text, how you interpret the text. So the interpretation comes only in the, for example, in the poem, language, literature. So perhaps that would not be proper to apply the same methodology to arts and humanities. This is my view. Of course, your point is very much accepted, but I would try to analyze this from this standpoint. Maybe the interpreter plays a very important role in hermeneutics. That is the reason why we say the whole part relation is something beyond that whole part relation. We cannot think of any other aspect. So that is a main aspect in hermeneutic circle, because now it is like a circle. The whole
Right.
is related to the parts, and parts once again is related to the whole. So in this way, because what the idea of the hermeneutic is that beyond this scope of part and whole, there is nothing. So in this way, we can understand hermeneutics from the philosophical standpoint. And secondly, with regard to, yeah, I am sorry we missed you. If that be the case, then please send your paper, because we are trying to bring out a volume. So I am very keen to read your paper, and you will send the paper for publication, so that we'll include your paper for the volume. That's one thing. And Radhakrishnan and Professor Radhakrishnan and Professor Murthy Garu. Yeah, I would say, of course, he's a grand teacher of Murthy. I don't. In fact, I find a lot of similarities only. Differences, I don't know. Immediately, I'm not able to think. But one difference is one similarity, which is very important. Is both of them, I feel, are not committed to Advaitins. Of course, my argument may be wrong also. I feel that both, it is very clear from the writings of Professor Murthy Garu that he is not fully supporting Advaita Vedanta. I feel he's a more Vishishtadvaitin. And also, we can see the same thing in Radhakrishna also. And moreover, Radhakrishnan questions the unreal, his famous statement. I hope you are aware of that. Unreal the world, illusory it is not. Unreal the world, illusory it is not. So he is making the distinction between unreality and illusoriness of the world. And there are many Advaitins who will not accept this position of Radhakrishnan. So many would place him not as a pure Advaitin. In fact, there was a volume published by the Madras University long back, wherein there are some professors who vehemently argued that Radhakrishnan cannot be considered as an Advaitin. But there are people who say that he can be called as a Vishtadvaitin. I am also support. So I can only see the converging point between these two great thinkers. But there may be a lot of differences which I am not able to quote immediately. Maybe I'll take some time to think about it. Your point is well taken.
Thank you, sir. Now we shall invite Alok Tandon, sir, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Pramodji. Actually,
Sir.
perhaps you called my name in the beginning, and I was on the
So,
road,
yeah.
crossing the road. So
Okay,
it was very difficult to take your call. But since I am not a scholar of Sachidanand Murthy ji, though I met him twice, fortunately. But I would like to have a little small clarification from my friend Paneer, who always amazed me, because he will be speaking on Daya Krishna 2 weeks back and again on KSM, and I don't know what he is going to do in the next week. So he is so versatile a professor, not to be found in present context, I think so. So what clarification I seek from him. Number one, when in the beginning you said that Sachidanand Murthy ji was against bifurcating philosophy into Indian and Western. So how and what do you think about this contention of KSM in present day context when everybody is talking about not philosophy in India, Indian philosophy having its own cultural roots. So I think this contention of KSM, what do you think about that at the present time? First. Second one, what I want to know from you, and that is also very, in a way, personal thing, that we have two philosophers. One is KSM, another is Krishna. How will you compare the two, and with whom would you like to go? This is the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alokji. My good friend, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, listen to you, and also your questions are very fascinating. Both are very valuable questions. But I would like to, yeah, this first question is very important. The second is also very important. The first one, Murthy was saying that the distinction between Indian and Western philosophy, this distinction he did not accept. In fact, he says, the same passage, he says, nobody makes a distinction between Indian chemistry and Western and chemistry or European chemistry. But now we are talking about Indian science, Indian mathematics, and all that one that we have to keep in mind first. And secondly, I feel this statement that one should not make a distinction between Indian and Western maybe may not be applicable. That statement may not be valid, I think, at this juncture. Why I'm saying this is perhaps what he meant is something different. That is, what he's trying to say is that philosophical problems are one and the same, whether it is Indian or Western. Philosophical problems are one and the same, but the answers are different. I mean, this is my reading of KSM. I may be wrong also. So when he says that one should not make a distinction between Indian and Western, he means that there is no inclusive philosophical issues that are discussed in Indian tradition. Philosophy general. This is general issue. Philosophical problems are one and the same, both Indian and Western. So why do we make the distinction between Indian and Western? And also, I feel that this article, this is a part of article which was written long back. Perhaps he might have changed, and I feel that he has changed. He has changed. And also, if I am there, I would also ask Christine, this correct now, whether it is applicable at this juncture. And I feel that this distinction has to be maintained, perhaps. This is my way of understanding Murthy. And second is very important. Second question is very important. In fact, where do I go now? Since I am talking about Murthy now, I I I reserve my comments. But I feel one there are a lot of what shall I say difference with regard to these two thinkers. The first one is with regard to the spirituality. No, all of us were in the Jaipur seminar, wherein all of us argued, or some of us argued at least, saying that he was Murthy was against. I mean, sorry, Daya was against this Indian way of understanding Indian. I mean, understanding Indian philosophy as spiritual, but for Murthy, Indian philosophy is spiritual. So I feel that there is a major difference between these two great thinkers. So I reserve my comments. Where do I place myself? That is perhaps after this I am ready to talk. But both are great philosophers, and moreover, I don't have the ability to say which is better or where do I go, to whom do I go. But both are great. But there are a lot of difference of opinion. Uh, there are lots. which perhaps I can tell you later. Now, because because we are paying our tributes to Professor K.S. Murthy. So this I have my own reservation with regard to both of this. This is what I. But both of
Okay.
them,
Thank you.
in short, both of them have given a new dimension. That's all. Where I stop.
Uh, Panneerselvam sir,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Panneerselvam sir, I have
Ah,
one simple observation.
yeah, please, sir.
Dr. Radhakrishnan said, philosophy in India is essentially spiritual. Bertrand Russell said, philosophy in the West is essentially scientific. So one draws from the root of spirituality or religion, maybe theology, the other from scientific temper of vision.
Correct.
So when you said they are parallel, mathematically speaking, parallel lines never meet. They maintain their distance.
Yeah.
Therefore, running parallel and arriving at this similar result is not possible. Of course, I understand philosophy includes both yes and no, true or false. There is nothing called in between thing, and mathematically that is called law of excluded middle.
Middle, yeah.
There is no middle between true and false. Either
Yeah.
a statement is true or a statement is utterly false. There can be nothing like that. But mathematicians are fond of developing their own philosophy. They said the third proposition is also possible, and that is called doubtful. It is true, neither true nor false, it is doubtful. So you develop your philosophy that way. It
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just a summary culled from our thinking of mathematics in an
That's right.
infinite manner. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing, only one point I would like to state here, sir. When you made the distinction between spiritual and scientific, Radhakrishnan and Russell, I would say that branding Indian philosophy as spiritual is a little problematic. For example, just now I was quoting Daya. Daya would never accept that position. But Radhakrishnan as well as K.S. Murthy could substantiate, and in fact, both of them have substantiated by their argument that Indian philosophy is spiritual. That has to be taken into account. And here I would like to quote the distinction which Radhakrishnan has made between intellect and intuition. He says the Western philosophy is more or less intellect by nature, but Indian philosophy is intuitive or it's anubhava. So this distinction actually gives Radhakrishnan a scope for understanding Indian philosophy in a better way. That he is of the view that it is based on our the spiritual experience or our anubhava of great saints and sages are necessary in order to understand the supersensuous truth, which is not possible or which is not acceptable to the Western tradition because they believe in intellect.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think we
Sir,
shall
in
come.
this context, may I add a few sentences
Sir, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
whether I am particular. See, K. Sachidanandamurthy, in his writings, he said, Indian philosophy should not be identified only with the spirituality because it is also materialistic in the sense that you look at Vatsayana Kama Shastra or the Kautilya's Ardha Shastra, all these things if you study, he said, and we will come to the conclusion that Indian philosophy is not merely spiritual, but it also encourages the materialistic values. Indian philosophy wants materialistic prosperity of man. At the same time, man has to concentrate on the spiritual aspects of man. So we find both the materialistic and spiritual aspects of Indian philosophical orientation in Sachidanandamurthy's writings. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I am tempted to quote something not new. Indian philosophy is otherworldly. Or say, to put it other way, religion in India is otherworldly. C.M. Joad used to say that this otherworldly nature of Indian philosophy makes it sublime. But Radhakrishnan doesn't agree with this. He says, we are very much rooted not only in the past, but also we are committed to shape our future. Therefore, to brand it exclusively as otherworldly may be deficient of thinking, deficient of thought, deficient of, as you said, of words. Words seldom describe our thoughts or philosophy. Okay, please comment.
Yeah, this see uh, this basic issue, namely whether Indian philosophy is otherworldly, because the Westerners actually have criticized Indian philosophy long back, of course, saying that Indian philosophy is otherworldly, is moksha oriented, is focusing on karma, doctrine of karma, etc. But all these charges are baseless, I would say, because we have different methods of doing Western philosophy. For example, Professor Dayakrishna would say that Indian philosophy, the view that Indian philosophy is spiritual or it is moksha oriented, is otherworldly. All these are not acceptable. So this means this is Westerners' way of understanding Indian philosophy, which I would say is totally wrong. So this methodology of the Western philosophers has a limited approach to Indian philosophy. So I think I think this was long back, but now we have come out of that, and we also believe that we don't. I mean, I would say that we don't bother for such criticism, and we have transcended those criticisms. So this is my view. So, see, the problem is even Westerners, at least now, have understood the significance of Indian philosophy. But initially, it is said that no, see, since you are quoting profusely Professor Radhakrishnan, all of us know that what made Radhakrishnan, what the compulsion he had to write on, I mean, the book, two books, 2 volumes, maybe Indian philosophy, volume 1 and also his MA dissertation, The Ethics of Vedanta. All this would clearly show that, for example, this Ethics of Vedanta, this is a MA dissertation where there was a need for him to write this when he was studying in Madras Christian College. Because now those time great thinkers like A.G. Hogg and others, they were criticizing Indian philosophy in the class, and he's saying that Indian philosophy is moksha oriented and other than. So he has to answer these Westerners. So that made him to write. Similarly, he wanted to tell the Westerners that Indian philosophy is something which is very much similar to that of the West. That's why this in 2 volumes of Indian philosophy you can see, and each and every page that a comparison is between Shankara and Plato or Westerners. But that he was too, I would say he was too apologistic. But that was the need of the hour. We at the time we in fact wanted a great personality like Indian philosophy. I mean, Radhakrishnan to defend Indian philosophy. Now we have transcended all this Westernist criticism, and we have our own way of doing philosophy. In fact, nowadays we talk about decolonizing Indian philosophy, which has we have been guided most of the time, guided by the Western philosophy, by the Western philosophy or the Western philosophical tools we are profusely using. So we must do our own tools to understand our own systems of Vedanta, for example. So in this way, one can say that these questions, these are perhaps invalid now. The Westernist criticism, I mean, the Westernist criticism.
Thank you, sir. I think we shall conclude here. It is already 8:40. Very nice discussion. And I shall say one thing, sir.
Please.
There is a difference between experiment and experience. Philosophy based upon experiment and philosophy based upon experience. This is the difference between Indian and Western. When in Western tradition we try to understand philosophy, we take the method of experimentation, experiment through the empirical instruments. Knowledge is one of that. Experiment, verification, analysis, all these are experiment based methodology. But when we discuss philosophy or darsana in Indian tradition, we focus on subjective experience.
Correct.
The seers, the philosophers of Indian soil, they have realized the truth through their subjective experience. So one is the subjective experience and the other is the objective experimentation. So here we have two methodologies. Therefore the story began with Professor Panneerselvam's talk that was Brahman. That means something indescribable is there. This can be experienced through our subjective experience. The question is whether it can be experimented or not. That is the problem. Therefore, we are taking some instruments for experimentation, and one of them is language. Second one is the hermeneutics or interpretative method. And we try to understand whether Brahman can be conceived, understood through language, through interpretation, or through any